Welcome to my podcast, What's Next with Lacey Dikkers. I am so excited to get this going. I have had this idea for such a long time, so I cannot believe that I am finally here recording and getting this out to the world. I am recording from quite literally my kitchen, so forgive me if the production quality is not the best to start off with, but we're just going to go with the flow and see how this goes. So as you may know, I will be interviewing young professionals about their career so far. In hearing their stories and learning how they got to where they are now, I hope that maybe you might get a nugget of information or a piece of advice that might help you with your own career path. So on that note, I cannot think of a better person to kick this off with than my good friend Maddy. We are both in the entertainment industry. We have had similar paths to some degree, but I am excited to hear her perspective and her story. So here is my very, very first episode of What's Next. I am so excited and I hope you enjoy. Hello, welcome to What's Next, Maddy.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, you are my very first guest on this podcast. I am so excited.
I am honored and a little scared.
No, don't be scared. As you know, this is just going to be a casual chat about your career so far. I am so excited to get chatting with you. We are on very similar paths in our careers, and so I feel like we're going to have a lot to talk about.
Yes.
So let's get started. Why don't you talk to us about what you do right now?
Okay. I am a development coordinator at a television and film production company. So basically, my job is to help with our development slate, which could be ranging from anything, whether it be just an idea we have, all the way down to it is a script that has a director that is set up at a studio, et cetera, et cetera. So we do short stories and novels adaptations into film and TV, and then we also do more traditional development. So every day is different.
Every day is different. That's awesome. So let's go back to the very beginning. When did you know that you wanted to be in entertainment?
I would say when I was in elementary school, I would always grab my parents' super old video camera and I would make my friends star in films that I would record like after school. And there was no editing. This was like on a cassette tape. So It was like we would have to film in like chronological order. And they would always be some like double agent spy movies like filmed in like my gated community. And they all looked the same. So I always knew that I wanted to do something in film and TV. But I think this industry is so enigmatic in that until you're in it, you don't know all the different roles that you could have. So I think in high school, I was telling people that I wanted to be like a director or a screenwriter. And it's not until I was in college and in internships where I learned even what development is, because I didn't even know that it existed, where I realized what was more of the best fit given my skills and whatnot, and like what area I would actually like more. Like I didn't know a development coordinator existed. And then for those who don't know, a development coordinator is kind of like an intermediary step between an assistant and a creative executive. And then once you're an executive, you're essentially a producer. So these were all roles I didn't know existed. So if you asked 10-year-old me, I would tell you like a director, probably up until college when I actually learned what the heck was going on.
No, absolutely. I was exactly the same. I wanted to be an actress.
I did not know this about you.
Yeah, that was the first thing I really wanted to be. I really wanted to be an actress, and that was what, opened the gates to entertainment.
Was there a specific film or role that you were like, that should be me up there?
It was obviously Hermione in Harry Potter.
Of course. I mean, you're British. So.
Right, exactly. That was the, brown-haired girl that I saw, and I was like, I can do that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my entryway into entertainment. And
eat your heart out, Emma Watson.
I know. Oh yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's say you got to college. What was the very first thing you did to start yourself on this track of wanting to go into entertainment?
I would say even just selecting my college, so I grew up in Florida, and I knew I was probably going to go to the University of Florida. Most of my siblings went, but I also considered NYU and UCLA and all these film schools because I assumed that's what you had to do. And it was kind of through talking with some just trusted teachers and advisors that I just learned that you don't have to go to like a fancy film undergrad school. You can kind of build your own program anywhere. And I can't speak to other universities, but I know UF, for example, did not have an actual film program. But what it did have was you could kind of build your own within their School of Journalism. So my major was actually telecommunications production, which was more focused on, production. It could be for news, but for me, it was for film.
Wow.
And part of the reason that I chose to do that was just financials, that in Florida, they offer this thing called Bright Futures, which is a scholarship, and it's based on your grades in high school. And then I also got a scholarship to UF. And I think that was just the first step in that. What I would learn is that, especially in our industry, there is no one path to get you wherever you are. I know plenty of other people in my position at other companies, and I can't think of anyone who did the same exact thing. Like, some people were lawyers first. Some people did like the set PA route, which I can explain later. Some people did agency route. So I learned just very early on is that you have to do what's best for you, and you don't have to go to some fancy school. It's going to put you so much in debt, especially in a career where there's no set rules or paths. There's no guarantee you could pay off that debt in a certain amount of time. So I would say it started with just choosing my school and my major. And then from there, it was about learning more about the industry itself, which, and this is not a knock at UF because go Gators, but I think in our industry, the most helpful thing is actually internships and experience.
Absolutely.
Because sure, I took like screenwriting classes and film analysis classes, and they were super helpful and amazing. But as far as helping you get a job and figuring out what is like a very enigmatic and weird industry, it's really about the internship. So for me, because also being from Florida, I could really only do summer internships that were relevant. Like, if you live in New York or LA, you can do internships in the fall or spring as well. But from Florida, it was only like when I actually had off in the summer. So for me, it wasn't going to be a few large steps that would get me into the film and TV industry.
Yeah.
It would be a million smaller steps.
Yeah, absolutely.
To get me there. So for example, at the end of my freshman year, my family lives in like St. Pete, Tampa area. So there's no film production companies there, but there was a commercial agency.
Oh, cool.
So I interned there knowing full well that I just wanted an internship under my belt that would help me get one of those bigger internships in New York or LA the subsequent summer. And that's what happened, is having that internship under my belt just in my local city helped me get an internship at a film production company in Los Angeles. So the summer between my sophomore and junior year, I interned out there, worked for that company, learned a lot about post-production as well. Didn't love LA.
Yeah,
but
we'll get to that.
And then and then that internship is essentially the only reason why I got my final internship, because a movie I had worked on at the LA company was one that got to be pretty well known. So that was, I was told later, the only reason I was hired in the New York internship.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. But it does go to show how, indeed, like you said, all these small steps are so important. And also that there is no specific path, and that you shouldn't write yourself out of entertainment before you give it a serious shot.
Yes.
And that it really is possible for anyone, like even if they aren't living in New York or LA, to be, considering this path. And I think that's a really important lesson for people to know. What was one thing about your internships that were either in LA or New York that you really appreciated and that taught you a lot about what you wanted to do in this industry?
I would say, and I'll speak not really to the commercial agency I was at, but to the more relevant film production companies that I was at, you really just get to see behind the curtain. And most production companies are fewer than 7 or 8 people.
Yeah.
So you really get to see people wearing different hats than you as an intern wearing different hats. I think the first thing I learned was script coverage, which is how to analyze a script and what kind of things to look for, because that is your first building block to an eventual show or movie. So that was huge. But also just, I think at the internship I had in New York, one of the bigger things I learned was how hard you need to work and like the work ethic, not just in the creative aspect of the job, which is of course my favorite part of the job, but to your point earlier, you have to make so many connections, but also keep track of your connections and who's doing what, because the journey to try to get a film made is a long, long road.
Yeah.
I was just watching people and contributing to the conversation of how do we get something made, and with every obstacle that comes up, how can we get over it?
So let's circle back. So you graduated and you chose to go to New York City.
Mm-hmm.
That is an incredibly uncommon thing to do for this industry. And especially if you're not already in New York, so many people, I feel, do just go to LA. So why did you decide to do that?
Great question. Especially because if you ask anybody, they will tell you go to LA. Yeah. 99.9% of job opportunities are in LA, which definitely is true. It was very challenging to get to the point I'm at now. But for me, I lived out there for a few months, and I just personally did not love living there. I think LA versus New York is very different in that everything is so spread out, and it's very inaccessible. And I also felt like the friends I was making and the people that I was interacting with, especially as a young 20-something, were very disingenuous relationships, because everybody in that town, especially working in this industry, is trying to get ahead, because there's no guarantee, there's no step-by-step guide. So it felt like any conversation I was having with someone, it was them gauging if I could help them, how could they use me in that sense.
Absolutely.
Whereas New York City is super accessible. You can hop on the subway and go anywhere. And it also just feels very real. I feel like just nobody cares about putting up any sort of front. So I just immediately, had chose the internship here because I wanted to figure out if I could live here. And after one day, I was like, absolutely, I would love living here.
Oh my gosh.
And I feel like that's true for a lot of people. It's you know pretty quickly you either love it or you hate it.
Yes, definitely.
But I knew...
Had you been to New York before?
I had, as a 6-year-old, to see The Lion King on Broadway.
Oh my gosh, that internship was your very first time in New York.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
So I moved up here for a summer and found like a sublet. It's funny looking back now because you're like, how did I do that? I didn't know anybody. But no, I just love New York. Highly recommend. But people are right. There are very few opportunities here. Hopefully that's changing with the pandemic. Hopefully that's proved to Hollywood that you don't have to physically be in LA in order to effectively do many aspects of the job in this industry. But I think for every 10 job postings that I would see when I was fresh out of college scouring for an assistant position, 9 of them would be in LA, and the one in New York would actually be New York part-time, mostly in LA. So it was very hard to find those opportunities. It was a matter of joining. There were Facebook groups for people who wanted to be assistants. You know, there's always like a friend of a friend of a friend who knows someone. And then even then, like I did get, interviews in New York, and I would make it super far, but I would get rejected. And I think that was super hard just because unlike LA, where there's plenty of other opportunities to then fill in that gap after that rejection, you're kind of ticking down the list and you're like, well, there's not that many more here. And it was getting to be stressful because, at that point, you don't know if things are going to work out. Yeah. Which, spoiler, they will. But at the time, I was starting to face the decision of, well, how badly do I want this? Like, do I need to move to LA? And honestly, like I was either going to have to pivot into perhaps a different, more tangential role in the industry or move to LA. And then this opportunity ultimately came up. But I don't want to pretend that it was a straight line. It very much, I can think of so many different interview processes where I was waiting and waiting for weeks and weeks and going so far down the line and talking with so many people and thinking I had it and that it was definitely mine and then not get it. There was a lot of rejection. But looking back, I'm so grateful because I think where I'm at now is definitely the best opportunity for me personally.
Yeah.
So it's, I guess, another way to look at rejection is that it might not have been the best fit for you.
Absolutely. And I mean, how I always look at it is everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
And it led you to this awesome opportunity.
There was one that I wanted this so badly, and it was to be like a showrunner's assistant for a show with a big star that was going to go on a major network. And I made it to the final round and like ultimately didn't get it. And this was the point where I was like, I'm going to have to move to LA and for another reason I didn't want to move to LA is just that it was so far from my family. I have a very big family. They're all on the East Coast and I felt so isolated out there. So I was like, oh, I really don't want to do this. And then, a few months later I get this job. And then because of the pandemic, that show ended up not even happening. So if I had gotten it, I would have had it for maybe 3 months and then the show didn't happen. So unlike a production company where if a show doesn't happen, you obviously still have your job because you have dozens of other projects on a slate. But if you are a showrunner's assistant or you're specifically assigned to a specific show, that's it. So if that show gets canceled or whatever happens, or if it never actually gets greenlit, you're done. Yeah. And that's no health insurance, nothing. So it's just interesting to look back now and just think back on how badly I wanted it, how devastated I was when I didn't get it, and now how grateful I am that I didn't get it.
100%. I feel like I have so many stories like that in my career as well. I feel like that's kind of part of the course in entertainment is that you're going to face a lot of rejection. But what is so impressive about you and your career is that you really are the queen of sticking it out until you do get your job, but also be like zigzagging and being like, this might not be the best thing for me, like what I want in the long run, but this is the best thing for me right now. Because indeed, like you said, you started out at like a sports agency.
Yes.
And that is obviously not what you wanted. So how did you get yourself around that fact that you needed to be at this job then?
I think it goes back to what I said earlier about, for me, it was going to be a million small steps rather than big steps, because if you are a Nepo baby or if you have great connections, you can skip a lot of what I did and you could go straight to being a writer's assistant or straight to working at a production company or an agency. But for me, and I did know plenty of people, but I just knew that it was just going to take a lot of work, and it was kind of just, I'm stitching together this plan. Yeah. So the first job at the sports agency was working more in like production management, which again, I have no interest in being a line producer. Yeah. None of that is interesting to me. But if I can get something on my resume and bide my time, and I was only there for like 3 or 4 months, I knew I didn't want to be there long, to then get what everybody tells you, which is that like agencies are the grad school of entertainment, which I'm not so sure if that's true post-pandemic anymore, but at the time, that's what everyone's telling you. Yeah. So I'm just doing everything I can, talking to you, like talking to everybody I know, to get in at an agency and then tell myself I'll be there for a year. And then the open role at the agency was in voiceover, which again, not what I want to do. But even within that job, just kind of making it clear of the areas I am interested in. So I got to sit in on the motion picture literary department meetings and do other things where you may not be exactly where you want to be, but especially in entry-level positions like this, like they know that like you probably don't want to be an agent, or you may not want to be an agent in the specific department you're in. So I think it's kind of getting your foot in the door and then doing everything you can to then just, again, move the needle more towards what you want. And I was there for longer than I wanted to. I think a big part of that was the pandemic. Yeah, absolutely. But kept in touch with people and just knew I wasn't going to be like a voiceover agent eventually.
But it's so important to make of it what you can.
Yeah.
And make the best out of your experience and still figure out ways to learn. So what was one of the biggest things you learned, even though being in the voiceover department, what was a big thing you learned that helped you in your role now?
I think, honestly, it was the client relationships, because I have always been a person where I'm just like, if you do the work and you're good at the work, that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Whereas in this industry, it's also about like, well, how are you in the room? How is your confidence? So I would be sitting in on meetings with clients where they're trying to get signed and kind of being on the other side of it, like the side of power of, are we going to take this person on? And the qualities that they were looking for was more about the confidence and the how this person is selling themselves in the room, because they have the qualifications if they're in the room at all.
Yeah.
And I think that was super influential in how I view like pitch meetings now in development, because it's the same if you get a pitch with a studio or streamer, odds are they are familiar enough with the story to be interested enough to hear this pitch. So you don't have to prove your qualifications to why you're there.
Yeah.
It's more of, I'm confident in this room and I'm going to make everybody comfortable and maybe everybody laugh and I'm going to make them feel the way I want them to feel. And I think at the agency, that was just so many meetings hinged on that. So that was big. That was definitely a big thing. And I think that applies to other industries too, is that in a job interview, if you get the interview, they've looked at your resume and they know that you're baseline probably qualified.
Yeah.
It's more about the intangibles of, now I'm in this room, how am I going to make you like me kind of thing.
That's very good advice. I feel like I should even take that on in my life. That's very good advice.
I mean, you're bringing great energy into this room right now.
Well, thank you. I try. The other thing that I really want to talk to you about, because again, I think you're the queen of this, is budgeting. Mm-hmm. Obviously in entertainment, you are not earning that much money. So how did you go about living a life in New York where you still felt like you could do things and still felt like you were taking advantage of the city, but on the salary that you had?
Boy, oh boy. Okay, so I think going back to college, I knew my senior year I was going to move to New York. Mm-hmm. And so I worked 2 part-time jobs just to save up for the move itself and maybe the first couple months of rent.
Yeah.
And then when I moved to the city and I got that first job at the sports agency, I was making $15 an hour.
Wow. So like minimum wage.
Minimum wage at the time. And for New York City.
Yeah. And
that was really tough because I think like my paycheck for 2 weeks would be like not even $1,000.
Oh my gosh.
Which in New York, that takes you about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So again, it just comes back to like, what am I willing to do to try to make it in this industry? So I was living in an apartment with 3 or 4 other people, and my room was definitely not a real bedroom. It was 100. You saw it.
I did. It was definitely not.
It was 100% just a glorified storage closet. Yeah. Like, I am a small person, and if I put my arms on either side of me, I am touching both walls.
Yeah.
It fit a twin size bed, and that's it. But because it was so small, the rent I feel like was like $600 or $700, which also in New York, wildly insane.
Yeah.
Now, however many years later, it would probably be over $1,000, which is just hilarious to think about.
Probably.
So that was big. And then I think just being smart about, obviously you still want to be social and have a social life, but just not doing what you can't do. So I was not going out to dinner a lot. I was not booking concert tickets I wanted to go to, that kind of thing. It was kind of just, you're British. What does Winston Churchill say?
Keeping calm and carrying on.
Yes, keeping calm and carrying on, just because it was just, all right, let me just get through this stage.
Yeah.
And that's not to say don't have a social life and don't do things, but like the most important thing is like rent and food.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a huge problem in this industry with how much they pay assistants.
Yeah.
Because when I went to the agency, I tried to negotiate, and I think I got it up to like $15.50.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is a huge raise.
And actually, the other assistants were like, wow, like, I can't believe you got that. Like, I didn't get that.
No
like, this
way.
is so silly. And there's been a whole movement called Pay Up Hollywood trying to get assistants' salaries up.
Yeah.
And I think the minimum has definitely gone up since you and I were assistants. I think now it's like $22 or $23.
Yeah, I think so.
Which is still not enough in my opinion, but that is miles better from where we work. I think also, to be candid, what helped is that 6 months in, we go remote. Yeah. So, and also it was the pandemic and I didn't want to be stuck in my, as we just established, storage room of a bedroom for the pandemic. So I went home and I still had to pay rent for a few months for my apartment in the city, but eventually I didn't. So I definitely saved in that I wasn't paying rent by virtue of the pandemic, which is not a normal circumstance. So that was big. And then just kind of expanding my bubble and allowing myself to do more things, or I'm not even going to call them luxuries, but just allowing myself basic things that your friends who work in finance can afford when they're 21, but I'm just now being able to afford at 26. Yeah. So it's just kind of expanding your bubble as your salary does go up, and just not being afraid when it does come time to negotiate to remind them of your value. Yeah. So when I was out of college, I was making, I think after taxes, like $27,000 a year, which is just insane to think about.
Truly insane.
And then I'm all about salary transparency, so happy to talk about that. That obviously slowly went up at the agency, and eventually I think it was like in the 30s, which is just hilarious. And then when I switched over after 2 years to work as an assistant at the production company, I think I got it up to $22 an hour. But there's also overtime, so that kind of equated probably around $48K before taxes. I don't know what it was after taxes.
Gosh, it's still not
a lot. And then so even then, just obviously living with roommates and just doing everything you can. But and then after I was there for a year, got promoted to coordinator and then negotiated up to $75K, which was a real game changer because that was the first time when I was 25 that I would be able to like buy like a basic thing for my apartment without being stressed out about it. Like, oh, I really want this poster. All right, I'm going to grab it. Where anytime before that, it was very much like, I don't know. It's also very frustrating because New York is obviously insanely expensive. You walk outside and you spend $100. There's just no getting around it now. But it's also your friends. You have such a wide range of salaries. Because I had friends who work in finance and are at 21 years old making well into six figures. Or friends in other industries who may not be making such an obscene amount so quickly, but still just making enough to not have to stress. All the way down to I had actor friends who were making somehow even less than I was. So it's just interesting because I think by virtue of being compacted with so many different people of so many different backgrounds and so many different jobs, it is such a starkly different range than it is like in other cities and places. So that was also interesting too, is trying to balance like one friend who may also come from like generational wealth and whose parents help pay for their apartment. They can afford to go to a club and buy drinks all night. Whereas I remember thinking, thank God for Uber Pool, because I mean, I would even take the subway back at 1 a.m. Sorry, Mom and Dad, I did.
You live to tell the tale.
Yeah. And if not, getting my Uber all the way down from the West Village up to 139th Street for only $15 because I was going to be sharing it with strangers. So it really is a range, especially in your young 20s. And I mean, even now, like in our mid-20s, I'm not going to say late 20s because
Not there yet.
You have such a wide range of salaries.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, but I think the difference is I don't have any debt, for example. And that was also helpful in that just knowing me and my personality. If I did have debt, I'm not sure I would have stuck it out as long as I did to get into the position I am now, just because of the stress of just having that hanging over your head. So just interesting. I mean, I have friends or even siblings who are physicians. So once they got into medical school out of college, they knew exactly where they were going to be in life, and at what point in their careers they were going to be for the next 10 years. It was all mapped out, and they knew how much they'd make, and they knew there'd be job security at the end of it. And I didn't have any of that, but at the other end of it, like they are hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt.
Yeah.
And I don't. And that's also not a knock at that. They love what they do. But there's just pros and cons to any industry you're going to be in.
You really have to think about it. Especially, you truly do have to think about it if you are willing to make that sacrifice like you did, like we all did, to be in this industry. It's kind of, like I said, part of the course to be earning very little money. So you have to really like entertainment to want to be in it.
You really do. And I think, as I said earlier, yes, it's an enigmatic industry, but once you're in it, you really want to figure out what it is you want to do, and is that worth this? Because of course it's amazing to have a job that you can be so creative in and passionate in. But at a certain point, like, your priorities can come in of like, well, I need to make enough money. Yeah. Does this become a hobby, and do I do something else? So, I mean, it's easy to be on this podcast and talk about now at 26 as if I have it all figured out. Yeah. But I mean, who knows? Like, we could have complete different careers 5 years from now.
Well, absolutely. You never know what is in store. But having said that, let's talk about your position right now. So how long have you been at this company now?
I've been here for 2 years now.
And you've grown. You've grown from an assistant to a coordinator. Mm-hmm. And you do have hopes of continuing that path.
Yes.
So how did you position yourself to get promoted from assistant to coordinator?
So I think every company is different, first of all. But something I did was let me already do the job. That's the next step up, and show you I'm doing it, or show you I can do it. And then that makes that promotion a little bit more undeniable. Yeah. So just having, and I think this also just speaks to like the mentors and the bosses that I have, in that they're always looking to how can you grow, or this feedback is always constructive and what do you want to do kind of thing. So and I encourage people to have those conversations with their bosses of what are the action items, or what can I be doing so that in a year from now, it's not a surprise that I'm asking for this promotion, because I am showing you that I can do it. So for me, when you're starting out as an assistant, I think the first few months of any job, you're going to feel like you suck and that you don't know what you're doing. Yeah. Even if you've been an assistant before, like I had been, just because every company is different with its just practices and what the day-to-day and preferences are. So the first few months, I honestly just felt like I was playing catch up and just drowning, but just very quickly trying to go the extra mile on anything. And for me, that was like, I am going to give my own notes too on the most recent draft of this script. And like, let's talk about it. And if you don't like my notes, let's talk about what I should be focusing on. And also just finding those pockets of what is missing within your company, or what is something that would be super advantageous, and how can I do it? Yeah. Because that way, when it comes time for your review, you're not having that conversation of, oh, well, I would love to be this next position or this promotion for XYZ. You're saying, here's everything I've done that this next position already encompasses, and I feel like it is the natural next step for me to do that. And that doesn't mean try to get a promotion like every single review or anything like that, because you do need to earn it. And I think that's also something you need to be very self-aware at, and something that I've even discussed with my bosses is that I want to earn it. Yeah. And I think that's been my biggest asset in getting to where I am, is just other people, and this is not a knock, I wish I could fake it till I make it. I love people that can do that. But for me, I just don't have the personality for that. And so I have to prove to myself that I deserve it. And then the next step is proving it to your boss that you deserve it.
Yeah, no, that's really great advice. So now you are a coordinator, you're a development coordinator. What does that look like? What does your day-to-day look like?
It's so hard to answer, just because, and I know everyone says, oh, it's not the same every day, but it really isn't. But I think, so our company is pretty unique, like I said earlier, in that we do a lot of IP, which is intellectual property adaptation. So it could be anything from we've come up with an idea and we've hired a writer to write the short story. And maybe I'm reading the short story to give notes on it, thinking, how can we make this as adaptable as possible? So that's something on the creative end. Another thing on the creative end is coming up with a pitch for one of the projects that we own or that we're taking out to other production companies or buyers. It could be giving notes on a script. It could be giving notes on a cut. It's a lot of giving notes now that I'm thinking about it. But it's also being creative. We do a lot of idea generation. So I'm brainstorming. It's taking meetings with other companies to hear what their mandates are. And by mandates, I mean what is the type of story they're trying to tell. So like, what is Netflix or Amazon or Lionsgate? Like, what genre of film or TV show do they want? What kind of stories do they want? And then so I'm taking those meetings, tracking all of that. A big part of being coordinator is you're tracking basically any material or information that comes in or out of your company. You are tracking that. Yeah. For us, we use Airtable, but there's a million different ways to track it. My boss likens it to being the brain trust of the company in that, yes, there's, of course, the scheduling aspects and everything, but just any project, and we have dozens of projects on our slate, I just have to know in my head, if you were to ask me, where are we at with this? I need to be able to tell you. Yeah. And there was something else I was going to say. Me being a great example of a brain trust right now.
I mean, that already sounds like a big responsibility.
It is, but I think going back to what I said about like the natural progression of earning it, is if you told me 2 months into the job that I would be as like embedded into it and just knowing every detail of every project the way I do, I think I would have a very hard time believing it. But it's just a natural progression of you kind of slowly build it out and get there. And I remember what I was going to say before is when you hear those mandates from those other companies of what they want, you're then taking that back to the team. And then in your next brainstorm, or if you're scouting for material, you're trying to look for material that people are going to buy, because that's an interesting part of the industry we're in, is that my company, we've kind of moved away from doing like indie movies or the independent area of the market, which I think just right now is contracting anyway. Yeah. So it's not as simple as, this is a great idea, I want to make this movie. It's, what are the studios and streamers buying? Yeah. And how can I make a movie that I both love, but also matches what they want, and I can present to them and get them to buy it? Yeah. So it's surprisingly a lot of sales work too. Yeah, absolutely. Is that, would you say, your favorite part of the job is that creative lens? I think definitely the best part of the job by far is the creative lens, especially because it is so expansive and you get to be involved, like I said, in dozens of projects at once in various stages. So it's very fulfilling. I definitely feel like I'm using my brain every day. Yeah. But it's also really great because it gets you into areas that I wouldn't otherwise be in. Like, you know me, I hate scary movies. Yeah. I've never liked them. I get full-on anxiety attacks watching them. But I have come to really appreciate them because one area that my company works in is in horror. And so I've had to watch horror movies and read scripts and just really study that art form. And it's made watching TV or watching movies just a different experience, because I think before having this job, if I probably wouldn't have ever even watched a horror movie at all, but or any movie, if I didn't like it, I would just say at the end, like, oh, I didn't like it. But now it's, okay, well, what didn't I like about it? Or what did I like about it? And it really kind of keeps your critical thinking hat on. Yeah. Even when you're watching something like Love is Blind, I'm thinking, what is the production value of this? No, absolutely. I kind of feel like I have done the exact same thing, or like, oh, that's an interesting camera angle, or that's a cool lighting choice, or you really just kind of appreciate what you're watching way more. Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. So we're almost going to wrap up, but obviously this is a podcast for people learning about these fields, but also seeing how they themselves can enter these fields. So I want to ask you,
what advice would you have? What is your biggest piece of advice that you have for someone who wants to go into development?
I think internships in college are huge.
Yeah.
I think doing informationals kind of like we're doing here.
Absolutely.
Just because when you apply for a job in development, there are thousands of other people applying too, especially if it's through just like a dummy email or like Indeed or Entertainment Careers or anything like that. And that's not to say not to apply through there.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a personal connection, odds are your resume is just going to be put in a pile. So as far as getting your first job, informationals, it also depends on what part of development. But if you're like me and you want to work for a production company, like I said, most people do really well if they go work for an agency or a management company first. Specifically, the best thing would be agents or managers whose clients are writers or directors, because then again, like that is your network, and you're surrounded by people who are at that point in their careers in the motion picture or television literary. So my advice would be, if you don't know anybody, go on LinkedIn, go search for people who went to your college or you have any sort of connection with. That's what I did when I moved to New York, and find that one commonality with them and just write them a cold message asking if you can grab coffee or Zoom or anything. And what I've learned is that people want to help people. Yeah. If you make that FaceTime and you ask for help, odds are when they do see an opening, like they will share it with you.
Definitely.
And that is the absolute best way to get in with these companies rather than just submitting your application online. So 100% do informationals, keep in touch with people. Yeah. And then as your network grows and as you move up in your career, turn around and help someone out the way that they helped you.
That's so important. Wow, that's some great advice.
Thank you.
And finally, as I will be asking to all my guests, what's next?
Great question. I would say for me is that continue working with my company. And like I said before, of how I want to feel like I earn that next role. The next role for me would be something like a creative executive. So I would love to get to that point, and hopefully it happens like in the next year or so.
That would be absolutely incredible. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Maddy. I really appreciate you taking the time. This has been so fun to learn about this industry, even though anyway. It's been so fun.
You're in it too, baby.
I'm in it too. But it still has been so fun and so interesting to hear more about your experience and get all of your advice. So I hope this is helpful to all of our listeners.
Thank you for having me. And I'm just going to turn this conversation into a movie.
Definitely.